Morning, everyone.
Morning.
So here's a question for you. Not for me. I'm above this, obviously. But why is it so hard to say I made a mistake and actually mean it? Why is it so hard to say I was wrong and actually mean it? When you enter the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles, you find yourself in a room full of interactive exhibits designed to identify the various people you can't tolerate. The familiar subjects are all there. Blacks, Jews, gays, Mexicans, a few unfamiliar ones as well. Fat people, blonde women, rude men. The examples are endless. And it's all designed to make visitors aware that everyone is capable of prejudice, and most people probably are prejudiced. And then once that point has been well made, visitors are then invited to enter the museum proper through one of two marked doors. One door is marked prejudiced, the other door is marked unprejudiced. The latter door is always locked, in case anyone misses the point, which apparently they do on an almost daily basis. No one thinks they're prejudiced, just like no one thinks they're dumb. No one thinks they're immoral, and no one ever thinks they're wrong. We all have these blind spots. And one of the biggest tricks we play on ourselves is the subconscious delusion that we don't. And this delusion locks us into believing that we're smart when we're dumb, that we're moral when we're immoral, and that we're right when we're wrong. And this delusion is virtually impregnable. It can survive even the clearest presentation of facts. So last Sunday, we read the troubling part of the Bible where the otherwise good King David had an affair with a married woman and then covered that affair up by having the woman's husband murdered. By any measure, this was not smart. This was not moral, and this was most certainly not right. And in this morning's episode, David is given the opportunity to say, you know what, I was wrong. I made a mistake, and I shouldn't have done what I did. And what I'd like you to notice as we work our way through this morning's text is how big David's blind spot is. And as you notice David's blind spot, I would of course like you to be thinking about your own. What is it you're missing? What is it in your career, in your relationships, in your health, in your spirituality that's there at the corner of your eye and you're deliberately not noticing it? Have that at the back of your mind as we work through the text. Okay, so in 2 Samuel chapter 12, we read that the Lord sent Nathan to David. So Nathan is one of these characters in the Bible who works as a prophet. And in the stories of the kings, there is this explosion of prophecy. So in the early part of the Bible, you don't hear too much about prophets. Then the kings come along and suddenly there's prophets everywhere. There's schools of prophecy. There's prophets on every street corner. And then when the kings go away, the Bible doesn't have too much to say about prophets anymore. The reason for this is because prophets spoke to power. And sometimes they said things that power didn't want to hear. So Nathan's one of these guys, and he probably hears the stories. I would imagine it's pretty hard for a public figure like David to have an affair with a married woman and then have her husband murdered without at least someone hearing about it. So Nathan hears the story. He goes to David and he says, there were two men in a certain town, one rich, the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. Cue sad music. He raised it. It grew up with him and his children. Music's getting louder now. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now, when Nathan is telling a story about a rich man, a poor man, and sheep, he's not talking about a rich man, a poor man, and sheep, right? He's talking about what David just did with Bathsheba and what he just did to Bathsheba's husband. Kind of obvious. It goes on. Now a traveller came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveller. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. By the way, this is great financial advice in the Bible. Don't spend your money, spend someone else's. Now, David is listening to this, and he knows, or at least he should know by now, how the prophecy game works. So he should know that Nathan is not really talking about the thing he's talking about. He should know that he's really talking about something else. So you would expect that he knows that when he's talking about a rich man who abuses his power, he's talking about another rich man, aka himself, who also abused his power. And it shouldn't be too hard for David to connect the dots here. I mean, you would assume that when you have a man murdered to cover up your affair, that would kind of linger fresh on the memory a while. Those of you who've done this. You don't forget it in a hurry. And so I would further assume that this story that Nathan tells would have pricked David's conscience very easily. It would prick yours, wouldn't it? At least you think it would. If you'd just done what David had just done, and now some weirdo prophet from God comes and tells you a story that's kind of similar to the thing you'd just done, you'd think you would fall apart in a nervous wreck. Your conscience would just rip you to shreds. But David, just like you, and just like me, has a blind spot. And this blind spot is awesome because it allows him to ignore his mistakes and maintain the delusion that he's smart, that he's moral, and that he doesn't do anything wrong. And so although he's just done a terrible thing, and although the prophet is now talking about someone who did a terrible thing, David doesn't connect the dots and think maybe this story is a story about me. And neither would you. You think you would, but you wouldn't. Our blindness is so ingrained that it survives even the clearest of facts. And this is why most people, when directly confronted with evidence that they are wrong, do not change their point of view, do not alter course, and do not apologize for their behavior, but instead justify it even more tenaciously. We're all like this. Take George Bush as an example. We now know, with the benefit of hindsight, that President Bush was wrong to claim that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. We now know that he was wrong to say that Saddam Hussein was linked to Al-Qaeda. He was wrong in his prediction that at the arrival of American troops, Iraqi citizens would dance for joy in the streets. He was wrong in his assurance that the conflict would be over quickly. And he was most famously wrong when he said a mere 6 weeks after the invasion that mission was accomplished and combat operations are now over. No question whatsoever that he was wrong about almost every claim made prior to and immediately following that war. Furthermore, in the midterm elections in 2006, which most people regarded as a referendum on the war, the Republican Party lost both houses of Congress. Sometime later, a report authored by 16 American intelligence agencies said that the occupation of Iraq had actually increased Islamic radicalism and increased the risk of terrorism creating the conditions in which ISIS now flourishes. Yet, faced with all of that rather overwhelming evidence, George Bush, rather than backing down on what he did and saying, I made a mistake, instead said, I have never been more convinced that the decisions I made were the right decisions. And you might wonder how he could be so delusional, how he could ignore all of the facts, which were considerable, and justify his actions even more tenaciously. And the answer is exactly the same way that you justify your own delusions and your own mistakes. You have a blind spot, and it is horribly self-serving. A few years ago, following on from the comment Carissa made about housework and mothers, research was done on housework inside a marriage relationship. And what researchers wanted to know was who in a marriage did what percentage of the housework. Okay. So they went to the wives in the relationship and they said, okay, what percentage of the housework do you do? And the average number given was 90%. That sound about right? Bit low, okay. Interestingly, they then went to the husbands in the relationship and said, what percentage of the housework do you do? And the average number was 40%. Now my math isn't all that great, but I know those numbers don't add up. And although the numbers varied from couple to couple, in each and every case, the total number given always exceeded 100 by a significant margin. And it's not that anyone was lying about what they did in the home, it's just that we do this. We hold positions and we remember things and we behave in such a way that always justifies ourselves and makes ourselves look better than we actually are. And we always minimize our own mistakes. Always. Always. You probably followed the story of our own Canadian Defence Minister that was in the news lately who misremembered his role in the Afghanistan conflict. This was a very embarrassing mistake for him to make, for which he quite rightly apologised. But what you may not have picked up on, and what no news stations picked up on, was the sheer irony in the House of Commons of politician after politician standing up and berating this fellow on being a liar. And I couldn't help but, I'd throw something at my TV if it wasn't so expensive. You would think that at least one of them would say, well, wait a minute, I'm a politician. I lie all the time. I constantly massage facts in such a way that makes me look good. And so maybe while everyone else is standing up and criticizing someone who's just been caught out, I should probably keep quiet. Because I'm guilty of at least as much. But I'll bet you not a single one of them caught that irony in their own head. Because we are blind to it. So you might expect that when David hears Nathan's story about how a rich man abused his power to get what he wanted, you might expect that he would go, ow! This is about me, isn't it? I've been caught out. The game's up. Time for me to pray, or something. I was dumb, I was immoral, I was wrong. But no, look at what he does instead. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity. So at this point, David is not a man who made a mistake. He is a king who punishes others for the mistakes that they have made. And notice the phrase burned with anger. He's not faking this. He genuinely feels upset about how this guy could mistreat someone else so horribly. And it's comforting, isn't it? To see that his own violation of the 10 Commandments hasn't robbed him of his commitment to impose those commandments on others. Lovely. We pull the wool over our own eyes all the time. Remember way back when Bill Clinton was president and he had an affair. I'm not quite sure if it was ever called an affair, but whatever it was. Redefined the language of sexuality, I think. But he had that thing with Monica Lewinsky. Well, the person who led the effort to have Clinton impeached was Newt Gingrich. And he was going from news station to news station, going on about how immoral it was, rightly so, for Clinton to be covering up his affair. It was only later revealed that while Gingrich was trying to have Clinton impeached for having an affair, he himself at the very same time was having an affair. That's comedy. And it seems very unlikely that at any point in doing any of that, he ever said to himself, my, what a hypocrite I am. Here I am getting all upset about something he did, whilst conveniently ignoring the fact I did the very same thing at the same time. We are like this. Remember Ted Haggard, the evangelist, very popular in the 1990s. In fact, in the late 90s, he was one of the most powerful Christians in the world. The White House used to phone him for briefings on a weekly basis. Seemed oblivious to the irony of publicly preaching against homosexuality, whilst at the very same time having a homosexual relationship with a male prostitute. Complete. We all say awe, but remember, as we talk about blind spots of other people, what are you missing? What are you not seeing? What's in the corner of your eye in your life that you should be paying more attention to? We are like this. We have the capability to see what's wrong with someone else, whilst conveniently ignoring what needs fixed in our own lives. Remember what Jesus said about this. He said, why do you look at the speck of dust in your brother's eye? The operative verb in the language of judgment is the verb to see. This is the classic judgmental word. Here's what I see in your life. Here's what I've noticed as I have observed the way you live. Here's my insight into your situation. We look all the time. And Jesus asks, why? Why are you like that? Why do you care that they're doing those things? Why are you so interested in the mistakes that they're making and what they're up to and all that stuff? And of all the questions that Jesus ever asked, this is the most easy to answer. Well, Jesus, the reason I look is because I care. This person is my family member. This person is my friend. This person is my neighbor. And it's so obvious to me that they're making a mistake. It's like I can see a train wreck about to happen, and it's my responsibility to point out where they're going wrong. A great answer and a true answer, but it's incomplete. Jesus says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own? So using now ludicrously exaggerated language, Jesus says, you know what, I've spent pages of the Bible, years of my life, giving you an extraordinary description of what it looks like when someone else, of what it looks like when someone follows me. And you know what you're good at? You're really good at picking up on the ways in which other people don't follow me. You're really good at picking up on the ways in which people in your little circle get things wrong and make mistakes, and you walk around poking your remarkable insight into everyone else's situation, and you're proficient at offering advice based on what you see, and all the time you have this ludicrous plank sticking out of your own eye. Now it's cartoon imagery, but work with it. If you had a plank sticking out of your eye, what would you be? Blind. And of all the human failings that annoyed Jesus the most, it was this blindness. And that's what he's talking about here. When it comes to comparing the way God wants us to live with the way we actually live, we all have issues. We all get it wrong. We all make mistakes. And using ludicrous language, he describes the lunacy of a person who sees everyone else's issues, but is blind to all of their own. And to prove the point, for the last 25 minutes, you've almost certainly been thinking about other people for whom this blindness is true. And when I was preparing this talk, I was thinking about all of you for whom this is true. Blindness we see in others, never in ourselves. It makes us immune to admitting our mistakes, being aware of our biases. In 1998, a team of scientists reported in the distinguished journal The Lancet that they found a correlation between vaccines and childhood autism. And as you know, this study generated a great deal of alarm among parents and caused many of them to stop vaccinating their children. But what you may not know is 6 years later, 10 of the 13 scientists involved in this controversial study retracted their findings when it was revealed that the lead author, Andrew Wakefield, had failed to disclose that he was actually conducting his research on behalf of a group of lawyers representing parents of children with autism, and that he had been paid $800,000 to determine whether there were grounds for pursuing legal action against the manufacturers of vaccines. The editor of The Lancet said that had he known about this payment, he would never have published the paper because the findings are obviously biased. It's a well-proven fact that we are affected in this way. So in one experiment, researchers took peace proposals created by Palestinian negotiators and labelled them as Israeli ideas, and vice versa. They took Israeli peace proposals created by Palestinian negotiators and switched the labels. And then they asked Israeli citizens which set of proposals they liked the best. And by a huge margin, they chose the Palestinian ideas that had been given an Israeli label. It seems we don't listen to ideas, we listen to who's telling us the ideas. So some of you, and I know, watch CNN, which is rather left-leaning, so it is said, and others of you watched Fox News, which is right-leaning, so it is said. Do you think that you are persuaded by what you are told, or by who is telling you what you are told? Do you think that if Fox News carried a CNN story, you would agree with it, but if CNN carried that exact same story, you would reject it? The evidence suggests you would do exactly that. Research south of the border found that Democrats will wholeheartedly endorse a restrictive welfare program, usually attributed to Republicans, if they think it came from a Democratic source. Whereas Republicans will support a generous welfare program, usually thought to come from Democrats, if they think it comes from the Republican Party. There's no question at all. We are biased. And so if someone pays you $800,000 to find a link between vaccines and autism, you're probably going to find a link. That's how the brain works. And yet, Andrew Wakefield, the author of this report, has refused to say he made a mistake. He can't say he was wrong, despite the fact that 5 major subsequent studies found no link between these two things. Despite the fact that as a result of his paper, parents stopped vaccinating children, which has caused the re-emergence of diseases that we thought we had long beaten. Even after he was struck off as a doctor, even then, he could not admit that he made a mistake, that he got it wrong. On the contrary, he justified his position even more tenaciously. We do this. George Bush did it after the war in Iraq. Andrew Wakefield did it after his study. I do it, you do it, we do it all the time. It's the only way we can cope with the tension our wrongness creates. So David simply cannot say he was wrong. He cannot say I made a mistake. It's too much. Then Nathan gets direct. He says to him, "You are the man. I'm talking about you." And this is what the Lord says. "I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you, and your master's wives into your arms." People in the Old Testament had a better deal than us. I gave you all Israel and Judah. All of this, if it was too little, I would have given you even more. In other words, David, you were at the pinnacle of your career and you thought you were doing well and you thought that was it. But that wasn't the level you were designed to stay at. You were meant for so much more. And I found this strange sentence quite challenging this week because, like you, I get used to where I'm at. And I can imagine doing a little bit better, perhaps. But basically, what I can see is what I can imagine. This sentence reminded me that maybe we create a box for ourselves in our imagining. And maybe there's so much more that we are capable of than we tell ourselves. And that's what God is saying to David here. You were meant, despite everything you've achieved, for so much better, for so much more. But you've blown it. And then the hammer falls. He says, why did you despise the word of God by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and you took his wife to be your own. You killed him. And then, after way too many words were spoken on this issue, eventually David says, I have sinned against the Lord. Thank you. Thank you. The word sinned in the Bible, as you know, means there was a mark and I missed it. There was a target and I failed to hit it. I was dumb. I was immoral. I was wrong. And what I like about this, if there is anything to like, is that at least he was honest eventually. And I admire that, because although it took him 2 pages of the Bible to get there, he did get there. It can take us 2 years sometimes, 2 decades. Heck, sometimes we can get lowered into the ground and never own it, never see it. We never get to the point where we say, you know what, it was me. I was dumb. I was immoral. I was wrong. We're more like Henry Kissinger than David. Henry Kissinger, when speaking about the United States' questionable foreign policy in the 1970s, famously said, mistakes were quite possibly made by the administration in which I served. So he's talking here about what the Americans did in some Latin American countries and in Southeast Asia. Actions today that some people regard as war crimes. Mistakes were quite possibly made by the administration in which I served. What exactly is that sentence? Is that an apology? Is that an admission of guilt? I'm not sure. I'm not saying mistakes were made. I'm saying they were quite possibly made. And when he talks about the administration in which he served, he obviously has forgotten that in that administration he simultaneously held the offices of Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. He basically was the administration. This no doubt allowed him to accept the Nobel Peace Prize with a straight face and a clear conscience. I like David's way better. I was wrong. I sinned. It was me. What's wrong with saying I was wrong?
Nothing.
I'll tell you what's right about it. It's Christian, for one thing. It's honest, for another thing. And importantly, it allows you to make progress. The second you say, I was wrong, is the second you force yourself to move on from the wrongness. The second you choose to see that you've been blind is the second you can no longer ignore it. And down that road, however hard that road is to travel, there is healing and success. As long as you keep blaming other people and not seeing what you should be seeing and ignoring what you should be dealing with, this is as good as it's ever going to get for you. You're going to stay stuck. And one of the reasons why the Bible uses the word repent so often and so passionately is because it wants you to turn around and go in another direction from things that you really want to turn away from anyway. Look in the corner of your eye. See what you're missing. Deal with what you're ignoring. Do we have time for questions?